Shabbat Shalom. This week we read Parshat Trumah, which is in fact the beginning of a 5-week period during which 4 of the 5 Shabbatot we will read about the description of the construction of the tabernacle, and then we'll read about the actual construction. It is, to be sure, a little bit of a monotonous period in the Torah's narrative. And yet, there's much to be gleaned from this process. As we'll read at the very beginning of this week's Torah portion, Trumah, Moses tells the people that they all must bring gifts to God. But it says, Vayikhu li Trumah. And it's almost as though the text is telling us that the gifts that the people are bring for me gifts, God says, are things that didn't really belong to them anyway, since everything belongs to God, and therefore they don't really have a choice as to whether or not they should be bringing them. And yet in that same verse it says, Kol asher nediv libo. The people that are supposed to bring is anybody who is moved to be generous of heart and generous of spirit. It's somewhat of a contradiction. On the one hand, these are gifts that they probably got from the Egyptians on their way out of Egypt. Things, as God notes, that don't really belong to the children of Israel. And yet they're told if their heart moves them, that that's why they should bring. How do we answer this contradiction? Well, I want to suggest to you that for the children of Israel, they had no idea what giving of themselves actually meant. As we see throughout their journey in the desert, they are unable to see beyond their own primary needs. So when they get hungry, they complain. When they get thirsty, they complain. They put no trust in God or Moses that ultimately they will deliver the very things that they need when they need Him. In their defense, this was how they lived. They didn't know from trusting in something bigger than themselves, of giving up of themselves personally in a way that could help the greater good. So in reality, they needed the push from God. They needed Moses to tell them that these things that you are bringing don't really belong to you. But at the same time, we want you to be generous enough so that you bring whatever you can. To truly understand what's going on, we have to fast forward almost 5 weeks to the end of the story, when we are told that they bring too much, that Moses has to tell the people to stop bringing because they brought so much and they don't need any more. The reality for them is they learn quickly. In its start, they don't know how to give of themselves. But by the end, they're giving of themselves so much that they create the only campaign ever in Jewish institutional history where the people brought too much. It is an important lesson, not only for the children of Israel so many years ago, but for us as well. What is it that makes us generous of heart, generous of spirit? And if we can't answer that question, we need to figure out a way to find those things that move us to be so generous. In a world full of generosity, I can only imagine that less people will want, less people will need, and truly we'll be able to understand that it all belongs to the greater good, to God anyway, and our role is to be generous enough to give in. Shabbat Shalom.